meant that the power shift that was taking place towards Germany and Japan immediately contradicted, and since they were kept out of it, the post First World War arrangements, it was immediately challenged and collapsed soon thereafter. And this was addressed in a way in the UN Security Council's Five Power Arrangement, which recognized that power must back up the ability to sustain institutions. But it also, as I said, meant that existing dominant power structures and their viewpoints significantly dominated the notion of what the world would be like and what would be the solutions to those problems. And in a way, soon thereafter, the Cold War ensured that the United Nations wouldn't work either. The world was divided between two conceptions of the world, between the Soviet Union and the United States, and the liberal and the communist powers fell apart, and making the UN system and therefore the organizational basis of it dysfunctional. And since then, in fact, things have not significantly improved, though the Cold War has ended. So we're confronted with the problem that the issue of world peace and universalism is essentially being perceived through material means of trying to solve very complex kind of issues and challenges that the world faces because of constant creation of conflict within the political world and the dominance of particular views on how to resolve it, which has basically been a Western dominated. And today, with the rise of new powers, that old model of thinking is under severe crisis. Today, the Chinese want a different way of doing things. The Arab world or the Islamic world is questioning from its own perspective very many aspects of the dominant international system and its current beliefs in ways to solve these problems. India's own experience is a very mixed one in some sense. On one hand, we share democracy and liberal values with the West. On the other hand, we have our own traditions and history, and in particular, in concept like the Vasudhaiva, Kutumbakam, etc., a very alternative, a very different way of addressing the problem of harmony in the diversity of the international system. The political diversity, the economic diversity, as well as the multiplicity of states actually focuses the challenge of harmony in diversity in a very important way as a problem within the international order itself that needs to be managed. Now, India's been a recent state in terms of modernity and its weakness in terms of economics and the entry into a world order that was already set and dominated by Western economic models and political models means that it has so far not been able to project an alternative model of itself or how to make concepts like the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam work in terms of economic models or political models. How does democracy and its problems based on a conflictual notion of power struggle be modified in a manner that within the state itself, within the country itself, we find value in harmony, in dialogue, in democratic discourse that leads to uh, commonality or shared views is something that on which we our own domestic experience has not yet been so bright, and it needs therefore to work significantly on elements like these. Our own experience of economic model based on capitalism basically has confronted us with the problem today of deep insecurity and distress among segments, very vast segments of the population, but particularly on within the agrarian society. And today we confront them. So, question is for Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam to work in terms of India's foreign policy and an important contribution to alternative thinking about how the world can survive and be peaceful and have universal values, it would depend heavily on the Indian experience being successful within India itself. And though we have a vast tradition and as has been pointed out over the last 2 days, of learning from our own experience in how to deal with conflicts, how to deal with diversity, what are the lessons that have been drawn in terms of warfare, etc., in our country. These are not really part and parcel of our political and economic discourse, in which political elites agree. And as long as they don't, as long as we don't have successive models of our own to show, uh, and backed up by India's own growing influence in the world, it will be difficult for us to practice or push forward notions such as universality of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and its value system. So let me conclude, because the time is short, by saying that the current international order, deeply dominated by Western thought, and the utilitarianism that underpins both idealist thought and realist thought, that focus on essentially from both perspectives of management of violence in the international system. One tries to deal it through international organization and normative systems and legal mechanisms and interdependence through trade, etc., within the capitalist world system, and the other by managing it through notions of deterrence, uh, uh, ensuring balance of power, etc. So one does it through management of conflict through balance of power and deterrence, the other through trying to bring them together under one international value system and organization, suffer from the problem that the larger world system has not been essentially participatory in thinking through many of these issues from their own perspective and experiences. And therefore, the Indian or the Chinese or the Japanese, the African or the Arab experience in dealing with this has not been part of the larger dialogue in formation of normative systems that underpin the current international system. And they today are pushing for that recognition. And in that for that to occur, a new dialogue needs to be take place on both the notions of the normative system as well as the notions of international organization, how it should be structured, what should be the concerns that confront it, how could shared values and shared interests be structured, particularly in the field of environment, in common management of the commons, management of global resources, a trading regime that affords everyone a common chance of success, and problems relating to globalization that today even afflicts the ones that were leading the globalization system in the United States and Britain. And secondly, in terms of our own practices, there has to be uh, uh, solutions in terms of how our diplomacy is conducted. Now, in the morning, I think the issue of reciprocity was highlighted very well in the lecture, and I think that is a critical one in shaping the world system. Reciprocity must be the basis of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It cannot be practiced unilaterally. Indian diplomacy has suffered heavily in believing that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam can be unilaterally practiced by making concessions to some of our most difficult neighbors at the cost of, for example, this is evident in the way we reached agreement with China in 1954, in the Indus Water Treaty in 1960, in the Shimla Agreement in 1972, and a whole how we accepted China in the World Trading Organization without any reciprocity, etc., being demanded from the Indian side. There are numerous number of examples, and I think a corrective is necessary. Reciprocity and successful systems that work within the country must be the basis on which India's own uh, role in shaping international relations theory and global institutions must today take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujit, for that very perceptive presentation. As I said, questions, observations on these two presentations would be most welcome in the final roundtable discussion. Arvind, would you like to come?
Present a memento on behalf of the VIF to the panelists. We will now commence with session 4, which will focus on the theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and international cultural diplomacy. The purpose of this session is to explore the ancient saying in all its dimensions and implications, with special focus on India's strategic thought and cultural diplomacy. For instance, how is the universality of the Vedanta philosophy revealed through the principles of the UN Charter? How can this dictum help in international peace building, conflict avoidance, and conflict resolution? How can it be adopted for international cooperation?